On a hot mid-July Friday, we made our way down to Six Flags Over Georgia for our first trip to the park. Home to 11 roller coasters, and we somehow survived the Atlanta sun. So let's talk about the day and the park as a whole. Welcome back. So let's run through the day's experience first. We rolled in about an hour prior to opening at 9:30 a.m., and the gates opened up about a half hour early at 10 a.m. Now the original plan was to start with Daredevil Dive to knock out that capacity issue, then move around the park. However, at 10 a.m., only Georgia Scorcher was open, so we decided to grab a walk-on front row ride there. And as we walked out, we saw that the back of the park still wasn't open, but Twisted Cyclone was running, so we went back down the hill to grab a front row and back row ride there. By then it was about 10:25, so we walked back up the hill to wait by the railroad bridge by Georgia Scorcher, but once we were let in around 15 minutes later, Daredevil Dive wasn't testing yet. So the audible there was to knock out Gotham City right next door with Mindbender and Batman, but Mindbender also wasn't running yet. Batman luckily was open, so we grabbed the back row ride there as well, and since Mindbender wasn't running still when we walked back out to ride, Goliath twice, and then finally Daredevil Dive was open, so at this point we walked on to everything in general. That was most rides for this day. However, of course, Daredevil Dive had a line, and I'll go into why a little bit later, but that was a one and done, mostly because of the wait. After that, we finally rode Mindbender and moved to the back of the park. Got single rides in on Bluehawk, Great American Scream Machine, Superman, the Mine Train, and Joker Funhouse. Then after some Dippin' Dots, it was around 2 o'clock. It was a cool 95 degrees, so I grabbed some footage and we departed a little bit earlier than I normally would from the park, especially a new park. Now, we definitely went light on some ride numbers and tried to get through the heat quickly, but I feel like I still got a pretty good feel for the rides in the park. Now, starting with the coasters, I'm going to do a full ranking next week, but here were just my initial thoughts coming off the rides. Georgia Scorcher was better than I expected, and it's a half-decent looper that really is just a little bit small, and the stand-up trains always suck. It makes me worry about the surf coaster more going to SeaWorld Orlando, just because it just would be so much better as a sit-down. Twisted Cyclone is a powerful ride that really could use a third lap that its sister has in New England. Batman was the best of the 3 Batman clones I've experienced, and it absolutely hauls. It wasn't really close to being the other ones, it's that much better. There was an audible gasp by the end of the ride. Goliath was probably the most disappointing ride of the day. Great airtime throughout the ride, some of the best on a B&M Hyper, but the back rattled me so bad to the point of a headache. It was the worst rattle I've had on a B&M Hyper, including Diamondback. Now, Daredevil Dive felt like half of a fun coaster with a little bit of a shake. Really would benefit from a few extra inversions instead of some overbanks, and a dual loading platform. Mindbender was fine, had some intense loops, not much else besides the terrain, but you didn't really get much airtime in the back, so I'm not sure if I prefer this to Shockwave yet. I still have to decide. Bluehawk was a very rough, and after all the defenders that came after me when I said replace it, I was surprised. The vest helped a little bit with not banging your head all the way around, but it wasn't a pleasant ride at all. Now, Great American Scream Machine was a very pleasant and enjoyable ride. Really a classic Woody with a little bit of airtime and just a fun ride overall. The retracking definitely pushed this up a bit, I would think. I could see how this might be rough before the work got done. Now, Superman with the terrain just adds to how fun the clone can be. I didn't really notice it running any different than the clone at Great Adventure, but the terrain definitely makes it a more enjoyable ride. Now, the Mine Train was a basic old school Arrow Mine Train, and Joker is a fun family ride with a unique location and setting. Now, overall, I feel the park was a little bit off because it was just so quiet, probably due to the heat on a Friday morning, but I really enjoyed most of the areas. I think like most Six Flags parks, there's just too much black asphalt that needs to be chained out, especially in Gotham City where there's zero shade. It's simply too hot in Atlanta for blacktop without shade. Now, the operations overall through the park weren't great, mostly 2 train ops on everything, but dispatches just took forever. The biggest culprit being Daredevil Dive. Now, a 6-person train should not have the second train waiting on the brakes every single time. We had a very enthusiastic ride out, which is normally one of my favorite things, but not at the cost of delaying trains rolling out by 20 seconds a dispatch. Now, asking for hands up or enthusiastic yelling and waiting for everyone to do it felt a little annoying when it was the only ride of the day with a line. Now, Superman also took a little bit longer, but those B&M flyers always do. It's an extra restraint process, so that kind of makes sense. Now, a few times I did get stapled, and a few other times the restraint was barely even checked, so it was definitely a little inconsistent there ride to ride. But overall, it was just a little annoying that there's one ride with capacity issues, and that was the ride, where the ride ops weren't trying to get trains out. Now, we didn't grab food in the park besides their Dippin' Dots, and the park was definitely clean and well kept, so that was a good impression. The park really did look and feel like any other Six Flags park. I didn't really notice anything too unique to point out. It's a very hilly park, which in the heat, definitely be aware of. Overall, my biggest takeaway has to be that the park feels exactly like a slightly larger Six Flags New England. From the RMC hybrid of a Cyclone, to the Hyper that should be so much better but it's messed up by something, to the asphalt where it really shouldn't be. Besides the rides not opening early, that's a typical Six Flags thing. The layout is obviously expanded from a smaller park, so be ready to walk up and down under the train tracks, which gets frustrating when rides aren't open. You have to keep doubling back. Top to bottom, I would recommend the park for at least one visit, especially the ride Twisted Cyclone, but without anything new, I really don't see myself making an effort to come back here. I still think a Raptor, a Power Splash, and or any kind of launch coaster could really improve the overall quality of this lineup. Just rip out Bluehawk and drop a multi-launch over the water so we have a solid top 3 here. Now, overall, that's going to wrap up the review for Six Flags Over Georgia. If you want to hear anything else, if you're curious about anything else, let me know down below. I really love having that open conversation. Next week will be the ranking of all the coasters in depth at the park and where they fall on my overall list. Till then, that's all from the shores of Island Coasters.